Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Endangered Species Unapologetically. My name is Devon Morris. I am your host on this journey, and I want to ask you to go ahead and subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, or just go ahead and follow us under one of the popular podcasting platforms, whether it's Apple, Spotify, anything like that. Just go ahead and follow us on one of those platforms. But let's kind of start this journey. To catch up a little bit, a lot of things has been happening in our world, has been focused on still a lot of the protests that are occurring nationwide. And there's still various cities that are having protests, but specifically last week, there have been a lot of protests in Rochester, New York around Daniel Prude. And with Daniel Prude, just as a reminder, this is the guy where everything was kind of hidden. This all happened back in March, but everything seemed to be pushed under the rug until beginning of September, so like September 2nd, something like that, where it became publicly known that the video was available and the mayor had suspended 7 police officers, okay? And so since that time, there's been protest after protest after protest, even to the place where protesters are being put in jail because they're doing things like putting lasers on people or doing things that could harm officers. And I know that in terms of peaceful movements, most peaceful movements don't have these crazies that are doing things that would jeopardize the lives of anybody. How can we really say Black Lives Matter if we're putting other people's lives in danger? I mean, if you really think about the whole Black Lives movement, the Black Lives movement is really focused in on dealing with state and vigilantes, making sure that they're intervening when it comes to state and vigilante brutality or things that take away from the Black community, especially when it comes to violence and things of that nature. So Black Lives Movement definitely has this focal point in on that. And this whole Daniel Prude situation would absolutely fall under that. So there's no way that they're intervening in a way to hurt people. Okay, and the peaceful protesters are not there to cause a problem, right? They're trying to, basically use their amendment rights and make sure that they let it be known. And again, I told you time and time again, if I had a family member that had some type of mental health concern, issue, anything like that, I would definitely pull back from calling the police. I'm telling you, I would pull back from it. But hopefully that's something that we can address and can be changed over time. And some of the things I do want to talk about is some actions, and I'll get towards some of those things at the end with some of the things that I've been looking up, reading, studying. And again, there's no one right solution to everything. But the idea is that we need to start figuring out solutions, especially as time of year where we need to vote, right? And let's put that topic to the side because I want to talk about voting as well. But this whole Daniel Prude situation, understandably so, understand that people are still very upset about the situation, understand that he had probably a mental health issue. And Daniel Prude's family, I believe, is from Chicago. I believe he's from Chicago. His family's from Chicago. So there's definitely that connection that I have with him, being that I'm from Chicago. So it's one of those things where definitely we support the protesters peacefully protesting. There's times and places for all other things, and none of those people should be hurt in any kind of way. But I know that in recent times, there has been charges against people that have been doing things where police feel at jeopardy in some kind of way. And I'm assuming that that's something that the peaceful protesters don't want to do. And for those people that have ideas like that, go take it someplace else, because realistically, they're trying to do some good. They're trying to change some things, and you doing whatever those things that you want to do are, is just a problem. It's not welcome for those groups. Find some other way to deal with it, and don't do it on the back of these peaceful protests, right? Because these people aren't there to be violent. They're just not. right? And you take away from it. I mean, I remember seeing a video where there was a guy that said he was not from the country, right? And he's filming. He literally has his phone. He's filming, and he asks people literally to turn over a car so he can film it. Literally, he's asking again and again and again to the point where they had to chase him away. So people are trying to sensationalize all these things and make it much bigger than what it is and take the focal point away from the problem, okay? That's not what we want to do. We don't want to take the focal point away from the problem. We want to keep it tightly focused on what the problem is. Now, before I start talking about some of the other things that are going on, let me take it back to Chicago for a second and kind of pull us into this week. Man, it's interesting. This year is turning out to be one of the most violent years in Chicago history. And I bring up Chicago because that's where I'm from. And I always look at Chicago as being, a microcosm for things that are happening around the nation, right? They might not happen in such an extreme way, but the idea is that these are things that just are happening all over the nation. So there have been probably 400 plus, maybe closer to 500 deaths in Chicago. Now, we just had a holiday weekend, and the thing about it is that holiday weekends in Chicago, there's always some violence associated with it. Being a black man from the south side of Chicago, there is always a set of violence associated with it. Now, this holiday weekend, I actually left Chicago probably a week ago to come back down to Texas. And I left for a reason. One of the reasons why I left is because I knew we was coming to another violent weekend. I just knew we was coming up to another violent weekend, right? Because it's consistent. It's a consistent problem. This past weekend, there was a total of 53 people that got shot. 53 people that got shot. Now, I don't remember what the total was in terms of people that died. The biggest concern I have is there was an 8-year-old girl that got shot. That literally got shot. And she died. She died. I mean, I have a 16-year-old, right? I also have a 20-year-old. And man, I remember them when they were 8, right? Each one of them, right? And on little special ways, but they're my little girls, right? And so it's peculiar because when it comes to me, I expect my kids to be the safest while they're with me. You understand? While they are with me, right? So I will go to Chicago, go to 87th Street, go pick up my daughter, and we're in the car. We're not stopping a bunch of places, right? We're not going to do a lot of things unless we specifically are going to do something that we want to do. So we're not hanging out on the street. So, when I was there, before I left, I took her out to a Mediterranean restaurant out on like 87th and Harlem, so we enjoy our times. We took some time riding on the lake, right? But while we're in the car and having conversations, do I expect for me to have to look out for bullets? No, I really don't. So the situation we have at hand, and again, I'm not going to mention any names and I'm definitely not going to show any pictures, but the situation we have at hand is that I believe there are 3 adults in the car. And with 3 adults in the car, you have a situation where you have the adults and a kid, and a stray bullet actually hits the kid. This happened on 47th and Union. Now, again, if you don't know Chicago, Union is a street I'm familiar with. Why? Because I grew up on 80th and Union. Okay? So I know Union, right? I always know 47, so I've been around there before, right? And so it kind of hit me because we're talking about, again, south side of Chicago, this is occurring, and it's like, wow, 47th and Union. You know, a couple blocks from 47th and Halsted being, 800, west. Like, wow. But she's in a car with her parents. Now, one of my fraternity brothers, my LB, recently had his mother pass away, and I couldn't attend with all this COVID stuff going on, but I looked at his emotions and the connection with his mother, right? So when death happens, right, even if you know it's coming, there's just a thing that it pulls on inside of you, right? And my grandmother's passed away. My grandmother raised me, and my grandfather raised me as well. They're gone. They've moved on, right? They're there with the ancestors, right? And I can't imagine. Again, I cannot imagine being in a situation where we're talking about my little bitty kid, okay? And I was there to protect him, right? Just wow. I can't even imagine. I can't imagine. So then what do? You're in a situation where you hear shots fired, and you need to get away from that. And your daughter takes a bullet, a stray bullet. It's interesting because I was watching something, probably Breakfast Club or something like that. They was talking to some guy, I don't know the guy's name or anything like that, but he said that it was two situations. One of them was with Breakfast Club. Another one was with Vlad. Does all this hip hop stuff, right? So two different things, right? And then two different guys. One of them was Filipino. He's from the Philippines. Parents are from the Philippines. I believe he's born in the U.S. And then the other one is just a black guy from someplace. I don't know exactly where. So both of them had their cars shot up. Both of them had their cars shot up. And I remember specifically in the Breakfast Club one, they said, thanks for people having bad aim. Thanks for people having bad aim. Because the guy, the Filipino guy, he 12 shots to his car, all riddled up, boom, not hit. This other guy didn't get hit at all, many shots, switch cheese the car, and boom, didn't get hit. Wow. So that right there is amazing by itself, right? So you're thankful that you didn't get hit. But then it goes back to the people that are shooting, they don't know how to shoot. So at a minimum, if you're going to shoot a gun, go get trained. Go get trained. Interesting. Well, who's really shooting these guns, right? Who's really shooting these guns? Realistically, when you think about the murders of black men, a lot of it is related to maybe, organized clubs. Some people may call them gangs, but I call it an organization, okay? Just various organizations that may not be doing the right thing, right? And so whether you call them a gang or you just call them an organization is irrelevant to me. My problem is that most of these guys are somewhere probably between 20 and 25 years old. Because most of the guys that are dying, because it's mostly men, mostly black men, disproportionately black men, When you start looking at deaths, it's like it's well above 50% for where we are not 15% of the population, you know? So it's like that is disproportionate, like jail is disproportionate, like all kinds of things are disproportionate when it comes to bad things. But again, that's neither here nor there. The thing that bothers me here is that you're talking about young men dying. Young men dying. Dying for what? For what? For what? And then you're talking about young men that aren't trained to hit their target. They're not trained at all to hit their target. And so they take the gun out and just fire, 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 empty the clip, right? And these are bullets that are going everywhere. And a 1 degree, I mean, literally 1 degree miss on an aim can be a lot of feet away from your intended target. So when you start thinking about it, and if you ever shot a gun before, there's a kickback, right? There's a kickback, right? And so if you're thinking, you taking it Scarface style and you got one hand on the gun and you holding the side and you just busting shots, right? You ain't hitting no shit. You ain't hitting your target. You hit your target by mistake, right? And so these are situations where we have more than likely young black men that are shooting and missing their target. Like completely missing their target. That's a shame. It's a shame. It's a shame. Like completely a shame. And I know that they don't have the intention to hit an innocent bystander. I don't believe that that's the case, because otherwise they just go shoot an innocent person, right? And so it's not the case that they're trying to hit an innocent bystander, but as a result of having people who are not trained to shoot have access to power like that, ends up in situations where a lot of innocent bystanders are being killed or shot, right? Shot, killed in worse circumstances. So it is one of those things where it's like, what do you do about that? How do you change that? How do you deal with that? Okay? So it hurts my heart to, and I mean, there was maybe in mid-August, there was a young boy that was killed as well. I mean, in Chicago, at this point in time, there probably been over 40 juveniles murdered. Now, I wouldn't believe that any one of those juveniles was murdered because it wasn't an intentional thing. Like, we want to murder this juvenile, right? And again, juvenile, somebody below the legal age, right, is what I'm really talking about here, right? So 18 and below. Now, that being said, some of those juveniles probably, when you start getting in your teens, very well, you may be a part of some organization. You may have been one of the people that's shooting these shots, right? Again, I'm not passing any blame. I'm not saying that this is what's happening, but maybe this is the case. I don't know, right? But literally, if you really think about that, probably about five of them was ages 10 or below. Ages 10 or below. So it literally hurts my heart to hear about that happening. I mean, it's like, I'm not trying to say it's bad for boys, but I understand with young, below 10 boys, I feel different. I really don't feel different, right? But a girl shot, young black girl shot while riding in her car with her parents, with some adults at the very least, right? The thing about this that's interesting, it's very, very interesting is this is one of those places where brings up the entire topic of our conversation today. And that topic is really simple. Hashtag, no hashtag. Because what you have to understand and where it concerns me or brings just a bunch of pondering in my brain, right? It's like this, right? We have hashtags when it is state involved. So not bashing the Black Lives Movement whatsoever, but their focus is state involved, vigilantes, those type of things, right? Hashtag, right? So you think Ahmaud Arbery, hashtag, right? Well, that was I would say some vigilantes, right? I definitely would say some vigilantes, right? So they get a hashtag, right? Yeah. You start thinking to yourself like, okay, Daniel Prue, we just talked about him. He has a hashtag, right? Definitely has a hashtag, okay? You think to yourself, other folks, right? Breonna Taylor, police, right? Investigators, whatever it is, SWAT, I don't know. Hashtag, right? George Floyd, hashtag, right? Dominique Clayton, was he a vigilante? He was at least an ex-cop, right? So, hashtag, right? So we get a lot of situations where there's a lot of hashtags, lots of hashtags. Hashtag for almost everything, right? Hashtag for almost everything whatsoever, right? But then you have an interesting situation that occurs here, right? We get these hashtags and then what? We get no hashtag for an 8-year-old girl. No hashtag whatsoever is what we're going to get, right? None. And why are we going to get none? Don't know. Because for every state involved killing, for every vigilante that goes out and does something that they probably shouldn't do, it's a hashtag that gets involved with it. Okay? And I really do support Black Lives Matter and everything that Black Lives Matter does. So don't take this as me being against Black Lives Matter, because I'm totally for Black Lives Matter. And hell, I'm black, right? And I believe my life should matter. Well, I'm taking back the should, right? My life absolutely matters, right? And everybody around me, their lives matter. Even if you're not black, your life matters to me, right? But again, as I said to you before, if somebody in my house is in danger, I'm more concerned about that person, right, than thinking about all of us, right? So it's just a different state of affairs, okay? But then, what about the ones that don't have a vigilante? What about those ones, right? The ones that don't have a vigilante involved whatsoever. What do you do in that situation? Wow, right? Well, what happens if the state's not involved? If it's not a state trooper or it's not a state city police, right? An ex-cop, right? Somebody that had some involvement with the police at some point, right? Where you can sue folks, right? Because in these situations, you can sue them, right? So when you think about every single one of those situations, you have, not every one of them, I won't say every one of them, because with the vigilantes, it's probably not the case. But with the state ones, you have a situation where there's somebody you can sue. There's somebody who you can hold accountable. There's somebody you can go to court about, right? And battle in many other ways. And it becomes epic. It becomes epic, right? I was watching on live, I think it was on Facebook, people in Chicago got together, not people in Chicago, the police and, some local activists in terms of the community. They were talking about the killing of the 8-year-old girl. And man, reward, pastors involved. Always pastors get involved, right? Trying to get people in the community to come out and say something, right? But we know we have a no-snitch culture. But does the no-snitch culture really apply to civilians? For all the gangsters that I know, they would say no. They would say no. A civilian didn't sign up for that life, okay? And as a civilian, if I did not sign up for that life, do I have to live by the code of that particular life, right? And the answer to that is no. I mean, most people would actually say that. Maybe some people won't, but most people that I know of would actually agree with that 10,000%. So then, wow, right? But are they going to get someone that comes forward about this? Have the other 4 that were below 10 or below, did they get people that came forward? I believe all of them don't have anybody that has been apprehended. And I'm not talking about convicted or anything like that, because again, convictions take some period of time, right? So what do we do? Are they going to get someone? My answer is likely a no. I mean, it's visible. I'm going to assume that every single one of them have been visible as well. This one was more visible to me because I just actually saw it live, right? I remember hearing about it, and it kind of just struck a chord to me when you say 47th, in Union. It struck a chord to me when you say sitting in a car with adults, right? I don't know how you can be safer driving down the street and you get hit by a stray bullet. Everybody, I mean, I can only imagine everybody in that car would want to get hit. But I mean, when you're in a car, you're a sitting duck, man. It's like, what are you duck in the car? So it's just, it is really, really sad. It's really, really sad. Because this is a hashtag, no hashtag situation. It's a hashtag, no hashtag situation. And what do you do about that? What do you do about that? Especially when the community's not stepping up. And here's the interesting thing, right? Somebody in the community knows. So when we have this hashtag, no hashtag situation, and really what I'm really saying to you is the hashtag, no hashtag situation is the multitude of violence that happens that is not state involved, that is not vigilante involved. It is a high percentage of that community against itself. So black on black, white on white, brown on brown. That's when there's no real action taken. I was talking to someone who just had an exchange with someone that was going to protest one of these state-involved situations. And was telling them, hey, how about we go and protest this other situation that's happened? It's been black on black crime. We need to deal with that too. And they said, well, that's not our interest. And I understand that. And I agree with you focusing on what you need to focus on. But understand something, right? 53 shot in a weekend, man. There's not a single hashtag for any of those. So you take Floyd, he lost his life, but that's an individual. I don't know how many of those people died. I really don't. But here's what I know, and here's how I have to behave. You know, I was fortunate enough to spend a significant amount of time in Chicago earlier this year. And I was there for another holiday weekend, okay? So you think about Memorial Day, July 4th, you think about Labor Day, right? Normally, spike in violence, right? You know, now where I'm staying in Chicago is not in Chicago, it's in the south suburbs, right? And so I'm out there with family, and you know, when the weekend came for the July 4th, I didn't go in the city. I had no business in the city. Now, if my daughter needed me, yes, I would have went to the city and we'd have did whatever, but she didn't have no business with me. And so I didn't go to the city to hang out or anything. Any friends that I had that thought about wanting to possibly do anything, nah. It's COVID time. Hang out with your family. Do whatever you're going to do. But I know already from growing up in Chicago that I'm not trying to hang out too tough on the south side. Or even go on the west side, right? I'm just not trying to. Chicago just wasn't what I was trying to do on a holiday weekend. Because again, like this young lady, stray bullets don't have a name. They just simply don't have a name. And since they don't have a name, I don't want one of them to find its way inside of me. I just don't. So I knew as a general rule, and I remember literally sitting down having a conversation with my aunt about it, right? And saying, you know, I'm not going to Chicago this weekend because I know how Chicago is, and boom, 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 boom. And she was just like, yeah, I don't want you going to Chicago. Because she knows as well. It's like, wow. But I'm trained for that. Do you understand? I'm trained for this. Wow. There's so many other things you can be trained for. But I'm trained to think like this. Like, I'm trained to think like this, to be prepared for war, right? And so literally, you know, I did have to go into the city, but I had to go in prepared for the worst. Now, mind you, I got a permit to carry license here in Texas. For some strange reason, Illinois doesn't have a reciprocal agreement with Texas, so I just can't open carry there, but you can carry in your car, whatever. And so I had to make sure that I was carrying, because I just don't know what was going to happen. It's crazy. I don't want to have to think like that, but I do have to think like that. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, I remember taking a friend in Chicago and them feeling my demeanor change. Like literally, you came in Chicago, and when you got out this car, you walk different, you talk different, you this different, you that different, right? Because there's a certain way you need to be in the hood. And you know, it's kind of wild, right? Because it's kind of like, I remember, because I do a lot of cycling, right? And I did a 50 miler. It had to be 50 or more miles. And I literally went all the way from deep south suburbs all the way to 79th and Halsted, my old neighborhood, kind of rode my bike into my old neighborhood. It was pleasurable, right? You see all the stuff that changes, and I've seen those things change over the years, you know. And then I rolled to the block and I rolled out. There's really nothing for me on the block because everybody that I know left. Everybody that I know left. Anybody that I would know that stayed, I don't know why they stayed. But everybody I know left, right? So just to see why I used to live at was definitely the reason why I did it. But I rode my bicycle into the neighborhood, right? Now, I didn't do it in the middle of the night. I did it early in the morning, right? One, it's going to get hot. Two, I know people sleep. I'm not trying to go and deal with what I know is in my neighborhood, the neighborhood I grew up in. I know what I'd have to deal with. So I saw the old liquor store and I saw Italian Fiesta and all those kind of things. And I'm like, this is great. But as soon as I was in, as soon as I was out. Because I'm not carrying on. I'm not carrying on. I don't have anything like that on me. I didn't have anything like that on me, right? But I can only imagine a stray bullet hitting me while I'm there. Just driving through the neighborhood. Or in that case, riding through the neighborhood. So it becomes one of those things where it is kind of crazy to have to adjust your life to like you're going into a war zone. Okay? But how can you be prepared while you're in your car for your youngling, your kid, to get shot? I mean, I go get my kid in the city of Chicago all the time. And once we get in the car, I feel kind of safe. I'm good, right? We're in a car, right? Man, I guess not. Guess not. But I love to see how many hashtags happen because of this. I love to see it. Because I already know, based on everything else, that this is another one of those hashtag no hashtags. Yeah. It's really, really, a shame. Okay? But again, I love my city all day, every day. No question about it. Can't say I love everything that happens in my city, but I love my city all day, every day. I can't really complain, right? So very, very concerned about what happened in terms of the young lady. Okay? And that definitely concerns me. What do you do? What do you do? Okay? So I hope that we get justice for that family, but it's a whole different thing when you have to bury your kid. I mean, there was a young man, rising, established rapper from Chicago. I won't mention any names. But he was the last of his mother's children that he had to bury. I get dude. I understand, him. Okay? And I understand why he didn't want to leave Chicago, right? But his mother buried all three of her kids. Can you imagine burying three of your kids? I can't imagine burying three of my kids. Can't imagine burying three of my kids, right? So there is a toll that happens on families that you don't see with a hashtag. You don't get that with a hashtag. Yeah, news coverage gets you the bits and bytes, right? The news coverage gets you the bits and bytes. That's what it gets you. But we never really get anything in terms of thinking about these families. But I can only imagine how the rapper's family feels. Okay? I can only understand how these parents feel who was in the car. Just wow. Now, I don't know them. I say that to you because realistically, I do realize that for me, I am 1 to 3 degrees of separation from probably many of the killings in Chicago, just based on the people that that extends in your network, right? And to bring up family, something really interesting happened this past Thursday in Chicago. When is it that the mail carrier is not robbed, okay, but isn't safe to deliver the mail? There was a 24-year-old mail carrier that was shot. South Side, Burnside, 91st and Ellis, something like that, right? That was shot. Mail carrier, man. Of all things I like to receive. I mean, since I was a little boy, right? I mean, itty bitty boy. I always loved getting the mail. I mean, mail carriers have a very, very fond place in my heart, okay? They really, really do. Nothing stops the mail from being delivered is how I always think about it, right? But we have a 24-year-old mail carrier that got shot several times. I'm telling you, man, do you realize that her mother is class of 92? High school I went to, Chicago Vocational. Literally class of 92, for real. I'm on Facebook and I'm seeing the pain that she's going through as a parent. This is dead smack in my face. Now, when I say this is somebody who I hung out with, no, I won't say that at all. But what I'm literally saying to you, this is my classmate. This is her daughter doing the right thing, got a nice job, going to do her work, doing her job like she's supposed to do in terms of delivering the mail. And she gets hit by stray bullets. Not like one bullet, like straight bullets. Like, wow. Okay? When is delivering the mail unsafe? Wow. And I have friends who are mail carriers, period, right? And boy, you talking about how they feel? Like, wow. I have really close friends, right? And so, to make a long story short on this one, literally, she survived. She got shot. She survived. She's had surgery. She's made it to the other side of that. She is laughing and joking, and a mother has let us in her circle know, at least through Facebook, that she's fine. That's more than what the news will offer you because the news doesn't know the family, right? And so she's laughing. The personality is there. I don't know what type of complications she'll have moving forward. I don't know. That's not for me to have any judgment on or to really even know because I'm not close to the family. But in terms of looking at Facebook and looking at the prayers that have gone out and looking at the concern that people have had over time for this young woman doing the right thing, just working and getting shot, that is unfortunate. It is beyond unfortunate. And this happened the day before 9/11, so 9/10, right? But I looked at the emotion, I looked at the concern, I looked at the community embrace a parent that didn't know whether they was going to lose their child or not. I mean, fortunately, they made it through, right? Fortunately, they made it through. Fortunately, they still got their personality. Yeah, the United States Postal Service has put up a $50,000, reward to catch whoever is involved in this, and they talked about, there's all kinds of conversations in terms of that. But that concerns me. When is delivering mail unsafe? If I was a mail carrier, I wouldn't be a mail carrier much longer. I would not be a mail carrier much longer. Because I would not want a job that's safe, but not safe. I mean, I know about mail carriers getting bit by dogs, right? Yeah, that right there is a concern, right? Carry your pepper, whatever spray you got for the dogs, right? I don't know which kind of spray you guys have. But carry a spray for the dogs, have a little battle, have something to, make sure that you're safe. And there's several mail carriers I know that have gotten bit by dogs and been up scrape ups and stuff like that, even gotten robbed and stuff like that. You hear about these kind of things, right? Yeah, you hear about these kind of things. But that is real close to be, that degree of separation from that. And to think, I have kids in their 20s, right? I have kids in their 20s, right? I have kids younger than that, right? So it's just kind of crazy to go through that and to see that play itself out. Not just you see it in the news, but you also see the personal connection, the personal things that are going on. That definitely is one of those things that concerns me wholeheartedly. Concerns me to no end. And it just ain't much that one can do about it. But it's just that truth, right? But again, there's no hashtag for this. Hashtag no hashtag, right? And the same thing, like was said earlier, there's somebody in the community who knows what's going on. Somebody does. Okay? And maybe they'll be willing to go get that reward or something, but I doubt it. It's not how Chicago works. Okay? So that is just another one of those things that have happened, right? And I have this tendency to focus on Chicago, but that's where I'm from. But these kind of things are happening in every single city, right? This is not like this is an anomaly here, just for the city, right? Yeah, Chicago has a lot more violence than other cities. I mean, literally, I think the month of August was one of the most violent months on record, right? Okay. But do I expect Chicago to be violent in the summertime when people haven't really been out due to COVID? Yeah. I see that happening. Okay. So that being said, I don't know how to solve that. I don't. It got a lot of media attention because it is a postal worker. But is someone in the community going to step up to make sure that those that have done this at least have a day in court? Okay? But it goes back to something really simple. For every single hashtag that you see, there's probably 1 to 25 or more other things that are happening in our neighborhoods that don't get a hashtag. That don't get a hashtag whatsoever. These are the things that I'm absolutely concerned about. These are the things that I am absolutely concerned about. Okay? So there's ways to address it. A lot of it has to do with economic conditions, poverty. So then you ask yourself a different kind of question. Why is Chicago so violent? Why is Chicago so violent? This is a wild one because it's kind of interesting because it's like, I've literally been in places that I think are rough, right? I've been in LA and, say I'm from Chicago. They say, oh, Chicago. Okay. It's almost like, well, we ain't messing with you. I've been in New York and get the same kind of response, right? Texas, I get that response. No matter where I go, I get this response in terms of Chicago. Literally, I've gotten that kind of response in India. Like in India, like way overseas, right? Man, you from Chicago? That's where all that violence happens, right? Yeah. But trust me, it's a beautiful city. But that's the other thing I hear, right? So if it's not that I hear the other thing, like that's my favorite place. I love going to Chicago, right? Now, for the people that's been in Chicago, I hear that from less melanated people, right? From people who have never visited Chicago, I hear more of the fear of the things that they've seen in the news. Okay? Yeah, and that is always interesting. That's always interesting because that's exactly, when I say exactly what I hear, it's exactly what I hear. Time and time again. Okay? So just another one of those really interesting things as you connect with people. But it's kind of interesting because growing up in Chicago, I really did not expect to live past 21. Now, it's interesting because the neighborhood I grew up in was Black P. Stone Nation. Blackstone Rangers, You're from Chicago, you've heard of that before, okay? And it's interesting because Chicago isn't like other places. Like you hear about things like organizations forming for peaceful reasons, for reasons to help the community, and you hear that about gangs and organizations, gangs in LA. You hear that, you hear about things like that, right? You hear about people getting funding for those kind of things, right? But that's a literal truth for gangs in Chicago. Some gangs in Chicago got an initial funding, however they did, starting off as an organization, from a grant from the government, literally, okay? So Chicago gangs stand in a very unique place. They stand in a very unique place. And the thing about Chicago, like when I hear about, Treyway, right? Tekashi 6ix9ine and all that stuff that happened in New York in the past few years, right? We're talking about hearing about things like Bloods and Crips. Like, for real, like Bloods and Crips. You're hearing about that kind of stuff, right? And I'm like, why is Bloods and Crips in New York? Like, for real. Like, that doesn't make sense to me, right? I hear about Bloods and Crips, yeah, but I don't hear about Bloods and Crips in Chicago like that. Because Chicago gangs didn't let them infiltrate and take over like that. So you will see Bloods and Crips and all kinds of things all over the place, right? You'll see all over the place, right? But you won't see it all over the place in Chicago, because Chicago has its own list of organizations. Lots of them, okay? So growing up, it's the environment I grew up in. Nothing strange about it, because the truth of the matter is I never belonged to a gang. Not one time in my life, right? I never affiliated with a gang whatsoever, because where I'm different than what I see younger generations, right? Millennials, things like that, is that they didn't really grow up in the hood, right? And what do I mean by growing up in the hood? You know, there's a thing about going outside and your mother, your parents saying to you, look, you be on this porch, you be in this house before the street lights turn on. There's something about that, because what did we do? Always go outside, right? I always went outside. So I knew I was a part of the neighborhood. Everybody in the neighborhood knew me. I knew everybody in the neighborhood. I am a member of this neighborhood, right? And literally, the OGs, the people in the community, they almost have an idea who's going to go in what direction and who should not go in what direction. And it was always, for me, this is not you. This is not what you're going to do. Not from my family, literally from males in the neighborhood. Like, this is not for you. You're smart. You're this. You need to do that stuff over there. So it was always you're placed in a certain place for me, and this other stuff is not for you. I remember clearly not getting in a car where people went over and, retaliated on some folks. And I was told, literally, this is not for you. No. Do you learn some of the hood stuff that you need to learn? Well, yeah. And how to make a gun, one-shot zip gun where you can kill yourself. Yeah. You learn all that kind of stuff, right? You learn what to deal with, what not to deal with, right? You learn lingo in that area, right? You in your neighborhood, you're safe. But that's in your neighborhood. Once you leave your neighborhood, the colors you're wearing, the way you tilt your hat, because it's going to be straight to the front or straight to the back. Otherwise, you might have a problem. Even tilt it a little bit, right? Could mean something. Could mean between you getting home safely, or you getting home injured, or you never coming home again. Like, literally never coming home again. And so there's something about the neighborhood, but the neighborhood took care of me, okay? And I appreciate that more than anyone could ever realize. Like, literally, I appreciate that more than anyone can realize, because I didn't have a whole lot of males to help me navigate, right? And even though these males didn't help me navigate, right, they were guys you would look to, and you had a decision to make. My decision was, I don't want to be like them. I don't want to be stuck in the neighborhood. I don't want to have this half a mile radius to be where I can only be at, and I can't leave it. I don't want that situation. And so I knew to do everything that they didn't do. That's what I knew. Just whatever they doing, don't do that. And that's how you can get up out of here, right? I made sure I didn't go to school in the neighborhood. Okay? I went to a school that was probably 20 3 to 5 miles away. Maybe that. Okay. Chicago Vocational High School, the Center for Violence and Sex. You know, started there in about 88, went there through 92. Actually, I dropped out, so I didn't actually graduate from there, even though I always claimed CVS class of 92. But the interesting thing is, I learned so much once I started leaving the neighborhood, because it wasn't just about the neighborhoods that was adjacent to my neighborhoods. My problem is we was broke. And in being broke, I had to learn a few things. I remember one of my cousins, I don't have a lot of male cousins, right? But one of my cousins, Ernest, he literally said to me, Devon, I always will have respect for you, because when we were kids, I remember you walking from 79th and Halsted all the way to school regularly, on a regular basis. Like, I wouldn't have money to take the bus because there was no yellow school buses that would come pick you up, right? So I had to take the regular public transportation and didn't have money to do that. So I would go ahead and walk. Just go ahead and walk to school, right? Walk home. But in walking to school and walking home, what my cousin reminded me about that I didn't remember is I had to walk through a lot of different neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods represented different types of gangs. And I've been chased through some neighborhoods. I had to learn how to navigate to get around certain particular hot spots to get back to my neighborhood or get to my safe spot at school. I remember that being a big transition at school in terms of gangs and all these fights happening, because the thing that's interesting is there was a dismantling of the Black Peace Stones, right? Because I believe Jeff Fort went to jail. He was a co-founder. I believe he went to jail in 87, 86, 87, 88. And so you started having these shifts in power that were happening around in the neighborhoods, right? Because the one thing that you have to understand, if you take a snake and you cut the head off of the snake, you just got rid of the leader. You chop it up in smaller pieces, and now you have smaller factions fighting for territory, power. So the government comes in and they do things to the organizations under their operations and things of that nature to indict folks or whatever it is. And it has a ripple effect, right? It has a ripple effect, okay? Good or bad, right? And so there's all these transitions happening, but I remember clearly walking through neighborhoods and how much I had to look out for different things, okay? I remember being in high school, and I remember I had a classmate. I won't say it's in the newspaper, but last name Seagreen, right? And I remember him clearly because he was smart as hell. I probably can pull it up. But there's a picture where he's sitting there, a part of the class of 92 advisory council, right? Smart guy. I'm seeing him in different periods and everything else because I'm a smart guy too. We're just all in the same kind of smart stuff, right? It's all in the same kind of smart stuff. But he had a different level of stuff that he needed to deal with than I did. He really, really did. And in him dealing with that stuff, he was able to make it to high school, graduate high in class. He was very smart. But he had a bunch of demons that he had to deal with in his neighborhood. After graduation, he ended up being, in 1992, the 934th homicide. You understand? 1992. He died like New Year's Eve. He got shot. Being shot in the head, maybe several other places, probably related to gang stuff, right? And it was interesting, right? Because this was a really smart guy. Really, really smart. And he died literally 6 months after graduation. Now those demons, probably just things that he had to deal with in the neighborhood. What was going on, what happened, I don't know. But I know that that's one of my classmates who had so much potential, and did take advantage of opportunities that he could take advantage of, but probably couldn't take advantage of more. And if it was put into a different situation, probably would be doing great things and have an entire family that he's looking out for right now. Okay? And so it hurts my heart to see that happen, because I remember, and again, not that he was one of my best friends or anything like that. I made sure I didn't have too many friends in high school, right? But he was smart. That's the key statement. He was smart, very smart. Okay? So to see him pass away just didn't make any sense. I remember hearing about it. So rest in peace, Calvin Green, for real. But again, this was before there was any hashtags, right? And even if there were hashtags, it was black on black crime in the hood. There was no state involvement. There was no vigilante here. So would he have gotten a hashtag? I don't think so. I don't think he'd have got a hashtag. And my concern really is about all of that kind of violence, right? I mean, I absolutely love what we're doing and what we're seeing on the news and all the things that are happening. I love it. But there's so much more that's missing. There's so much more that is missing. And I am more concerned at this particular point in time of all of those things that are missing in terms of what we're doing to ourselves, people. So Chris Green, that's his name, Chris Green. Hashtag Chris Green, even though it'd be hashtag no hashtag, right? So it's interesting to see people who were very, very smart and their parents have to bury them, who could have had wonderful and great things happen, but didn't for whatever reason. It just confuses me completely. Yeah. Anyway, just brilliance, just a brilliant light dimmed too soon. That concerns me. So that just gives you some of the things that have happened. But that doesn't get at why Chicago is so violent. Okay? It doesn't get at that. But I would say to you that a lot of places that have violence normally have, especially a lot of this kind of violence, they normally have a lot of factors that kind of coalesce and give you the right conditions to have this kind of a problem. You know, if I just kind of wave us back in time a little bit and think back to my time in the 80s in Chicago, when I think about other people that's my age group that have grew up on the coast, there's a big difference in their 80s time and my 80s time. And that big difference is the crack epidemic. Did the crack epidemic have a huge impact on Chicago? Yes. But was that epidemic, did it happen at the same time that everybody else's did? Because when you think about the crack epidemic, if I was to think about, major players, big time drug dealers, right? You start looking at West Coast, right? And you hear big names, right? Highway Ricky, other names that just come out of play. And a lot of that driving of that economy, them making millions of dollars a day, was driven by the actual drug business, but the epidemic of crack. Now, again, one day, we'll have to get into the conversation about the government's involvement and all that kind of stuff, because I'll bring on a guest and we'll talk about that with somebody who has way more expertise than me in it, right? But we know that, Chicago gangs don't just go buy a bunch of AK-47s and all these weapons that just don't appear in Chicago, right? They don't make them. We don't make those things, right? There are stories of guns being dropped in the neighborhoods and just a whole batch of them, right? And then, they're in the hands of, gangs. But let's get back to it. That crack epidemic that started happening in LA took years to happen before it became an epidemic in Chicago. Bloods and Crips started running that situation. Even Bloods and Crips, I would assume, made it to New York, East Coast, at various places like Kansas City, Memphis, and all that kind of stuff, and just making these things happen, right? I remember hearing about various Jamaican posses on the East Coast happening, whether it is down in Miami, New York. I remember hearing about those things and related to the crack epidemic, right? So you get to see things like New Jack City and all this kind of stuff, right? That's interesting, right? Because the truth is that it didn't happen in Chicago as fast because Chicago gangs kept those other factions out of Chicago. It didn't really become a problem for Chicago until you get into the late 80s, early 90s. Late 80s, early 90s. Okay? You start seeing that, these indictments that happened for people like Jeff Ford, late 80s, right, for various reasons. They even had situations with drugs, or at least allegedly, right? I don't really know what he was convicted of. But then those factions that broke out from that, right, finding ways to get power. So you start seeing this thing grow over time. And then you start seeing in this very early 90s, right? Because 1992 had at least 934 homicides. I think right now in Chicago, there's probably about 450 to 500. And we're into the 9th month, right? So it probably won't go down as the most murderous year, but I remember 92. Clearly remember 92, right? I remember 91 leading up to that, 90 leading up to that. And I remember the world, the environment kind of changing. I remember there being gang fights inside a school because of territory or whatever it is, right? I remember all these things, but I remember those things getting worse and worse and worse and worse as I spent more time in terms of, moving on in terms of progression in school. In the mid 90s, you'll see, the Gangster Disciples, Larry Hoover kind of go to jail. You'll see those kind of things happen, probably mid 90s, right? And I would say to you comfortably, very comfortably, that when they dismantled these organizations, the fracturing of these organizations has probably turned into a lot of the problems that we see today. It's kind of like I always think there's this lagging effect where you have some actions and you really see the consequences of those actions, 15 to 30 years later. And you see the consequences of those actions at this particular point in time. Now, knowing what's right to do and what's wrong to do, it never solved the problem of poverty and people having an economic opportunity, right? That doesn't even count for, laws being disproportionate in the black neighborhood. And you think about folks, like Clinton, President Bill Clinton is who I'm talking about, right? Putting laws in place. Bush 1 putting laws in place, right? Reagan putting laws in place, right? That are so much more detrimental to the black community. Definitely having a huge impact on Chicago. Okay? So realistically, when you have a situation where you have this food desert, economic depression, no way to opportunities just not there. And then you have something like crack comes in and provide opportunity, right? Now you start getting, you're fighting over territory. But you don't have leadership in place where you can actually remove some of the gunplay. It's just interesting, right? And I've been thinking about it and I've been reading stuff on it. Because in my mind, I'm trying to figure out how do we solve the problem. Okay? I'm not saying that, there's no other reasons for these things happening, right? But I guarantee you that these are some of the reasons why these things happen. Okay? I even heard recently, not that I probably been doing research, that Hoover and Ford has sat down and eat lunch together sometimes, right? Those are beautiful things, right? But the vacuum is the problem. The vacuum of leadership. It's something very different than, things like Latin Kings, other types of gangs, because there seems to be a very centralized organization. Even though you can call it a criminal organization or whatever, it seems to be more centralized. There seems to be a leadership in place, right? Not as dismantled in the same way, right? But somehow our stuff kind of gets dismantled. So just one of the reasons why you're talking about something that can contribute to that, okay? Now, it's interesting. I was doing a little bit of research, and it kind of led me to a place to start looking for solutions. And there was an article, and I'm gonna pull the article up. What I'll do is I'll make sure you have a link to this article. And University of Illinois Chicago had some PhDs that they got together and kind of started thinking about some of these problems, right? And the article that I'm looking at is The Fracturing of Gangs and Violence in Chicago, a research-based reorientation of violence prevention and intervention policy, right? This was published January 19th, and it's nice to see stuff that's published so it can be peer-reviewed, it can be debated, it can be all these different things. And realistically, the authors here, let's see, Hagedorn, Afam, I don't know how to say these names correctly, but the idea is that I'll leave the link for you so then you have an idea of it. But when I look at just the summary, right, because there seems to have been a conference about this, and a few of the bullets that I want to point out to you that are important here is the first bullet here says the nature of gang violence in Chicago has been changing, but the policies and practices toward it have not. I can agree with that wholeheartedly. But I think that the approach for drugs, period, hasn't changed since Reagan. You remember back in the day, you see, them put an egg on the frying pan and say, this is your brain on drugs, don't do drugs. Like, that was Nancy Reagan's whole thing, right? And you see all these commercials coming up on TV as a kid. Like, you have your Saturday morning cartoons, right? Or you come in and watch cartoons when you get back from school, whatever it is, right? And you always see, don't do drugs, don't do drugs, don't do drugs, like it's really that easy. But I don't believe that the government in general, whether it's local, state, or federal, have really changed any policies to try to address these things. Actually, I think that the people are so far removed from it because it's not happening in neighborhoods. But they're actually thinking about it now because of the opioid epidemic is impacting their neighborhoods now. And so they're definitely thinking about policies at this point. But I don't believe that they've really changed much whatsoever. So that's something I agree with as I have thought about it through and through, okay? The second thing in that summary, conference summary says, data from conference presentations show that Chicago's high level of violence are persisting, suggesting that current approaches need to be readjusted. So they're saying that nothing's changing. So again, it goes back to local actions that we're taking. They're just not working. But again, when something does start working, forces find a way to work around that. It's like if you take a prescription drug, your body builds an immunity to it. So the community will build an immunity to whatever you're putting in place. So you will have to change. Let's see. Next one. The conference presenters call for a new anti-violence policy that de-emphasizes gangs and instead emphasizes conflict resolution among youth in context of significantly increased employment and neighborhood economic development. If there was one thing that I could tell you that I agree with this article wholeheartedly, is opportunity and neighborhood development. I don't have an issue with people burning down the neighborhoods because they don't own nothing there. Yeah, I know that, there will be some places that won't come back for 30, 40 years. Get that. But it is just one of those truths when there's no opportunity. Okay. So I agree with that wholeheartedly. And it's the main reason why I couldn't stay in the city. Because even for me, I had to go find opportunity elsewhere, outside of Chicago. And then as soon as I left Chicago, I'm getting all kinds of opportunity. People in Chicago want to give me opportunity. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But that is on point, okay? And it's one of the major things that I think about economic inclusion right now. Economic inclusion right now. Economic inclusion right now. Then it goes on to say all gangs are not alike. So the truth is, the absolute truth is, the west side of Chicago is absolutely different than the south side of Chicago. Why are we so different? I have no clue. Because all I know is that as a south sider, I never went to the west side. I don't even know the street names on the west side. Because the rule was don't go to the west side. It just was the rule. Don't go to the west side and don't go to neighborhoods that got a bunch of racists in it. Chicago's super segregated. Please understand, it's one of the most segregated, always been one of the most segregated cities in the nation, right? So it's just, again, just one of those things. It just is what it is. But all Chicago gangs are not alike. And Chicago gangs are definitely not like gangs outside of Chicago. Chicago as a whole is just different. And it's different for various reasons, but it's just different. And you got to recognize and hold on and deal with that difference accordingly. Then it goes on to say, and this is the last one, it says persistent disinvestment and concentrated poverty amounts to an assault on the dignity and self-worth of black youth and is correlated with violence. Oh, can't agree with that more. Can't agree with that more. I didn't even remember that one. But our self-image is a whole different problem. You know, it's kind of interesting with that self-image thing, right? It's kind of interesting because, you know, I dropped out of high school. I literally dropped out of high school, right? And I had an aunt that was living in Miami, and she said, "Come on down." I love my aunt, you know. Hey aunt. And I ended up graduating on time, even though I flunked my whole whole fall semester of my senior year, just washed out, man. But the thing that's interesting is I went from a high school where they had metal detectors. I mean, literally, you walk in, there's metal detectors, right? So you got to go through the metal detectors. You know, you can't leave the school for lunch or anything like that. Otherwise, there's a problem. Okay? I get it. No problem. I'm not complaining, right? Man, when I went to school, this other school, man, down in Miami, man, them kids were sitting in the hallway. They was literally sitting in the hallway. I'm like, where they do this at? And then they could leave the school almost any time they wanted to. There was absolutely no metal detectors, man. There was none. I thought I was in a foreign place. And it shocked me because this is the first time that I really had interaction with white students. Outside of the competition here and there, right? Because, you know, if you're one of the smart kids in school, you go to competitions, and sometimes those competitions will be with schools that have white people, right? But my school had no white people. Maybe a white teacher here and there. I don't remember a single white kid, man. I don't. Not in my school, no. It's blacks, like maybe 99%. And then some Latinos, right? Latinx, right? Is what was in my school, right? And so when I went there, I was like shocked, right? I'm like, wait a minute, what is this like? What is really going on here? And I guess I may have made a friend or two. I'm not sure, because I don't remember anybody from that wholeheartedly, right? I remember a couple people from that. I'm just BSing, right? But I clearly remember something interesting, right? I remember going into a house of a friend, And mother, his mother and father was like doctors and lawyers, right? They was like the Huxtables, right? They was like the Huxtables, right? And I never seen anybody that had that in existence. Because in my neighborhood, we didn't have those kind of people. Like I never ran locally across a doctor, a lawyer, or anything like that. Not in my neighborhood. Not in my neighborhood. Not at all. People's parents was whatever they were. But most of the people that I know of wasn't. For the people that were working, I guess they were going to work, right? But a lot of people weren't working, right? So it's very, very different. It's very, very shocking for me. And it kind of prepared me not to be so shocked when I went to college. But man, when I went to college, I was super shocked. I keep them at bay a little bit. But when I went to college, I couldn't keep them at bay. So I was completely culture shocked in college. But it taught me something different, right? And I got to see a different side of life that I never was able to see in Chicago. Now, I'm not saying it didn't exist, because you have to understand, I didn't grow up middle class, right? In my first marriage, right? She had a 2-parent household. We went to church all the time. When I met her, she was calling her mother every day while we was in college. Like, it was every day, right? I was barely talking to them. I was raised by my grandmother. So I called my grandmother every once in a while, when I could, when I had some money, because you had to actually pay to make calls, right? So it was just different, right? It was just really, really different. And there's always been a middle class black contingent, no question about that, right? And probably, those people have doctors and lawyers, or just regular working people that worked, just not the everyday blue collar job, right? I just was around blue collar kind of people. That's it. And so that's what I grew up around, right? So I didn't know anything different, right? So I went to Chicago Vocational High School so I could learn a trade, because I didn't know that college was possible. I didn't know whatsoever that college was possible, okay? And also something interesting happened. My grandmother always had a slight disdain for our people, and she always had a nicer set of statements to make for white people, which is something I noticed. In every house, in terms of the black community, you'd have 2 pictures up: Martin Luther King, white Jesus. So be your 2. And I just think that's a carryover from Mississippi, because she was born in Sunflower, Mississippi. I just think it's a carryover from that. And battling that kind of mindset, I can't say to you that I had a lot of worth for myself. I did, but I did for different reasons. I thought I was going to die by 21 for sure, but I had another side of my family that was better off. My father's side of the family is better off than my mother's side of the family, and they instilled some pride in me. And I'm very fortunate of that, because there are other people that exist in my family that didn't get that, and you can see some differences. And I've never been the person that wants to see differences in my family. I always want to see my family be good. But I know for a fact that our black youth don't have a lot of pride in themselves. And the reason why I know that to be a fact is because I grew up as one of those black kids. And being one of those black kids, sitting in the neighborhood, when I got to college, I learned so much more about me. Like, I would say to you that my first year in college was the only year I really needed, because it was my year of self-discovery. I mean, I went to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. It had the third largest university system library in the United States of America, and it had book after book after book after book. And I swear I did not like reading, but I love reading about myself. I started learning things about us, not looking at Africa like it's Timbuktu and giving it negative, dark connotations, right? Because I didn't have anybody to teach me that whatsoever. So I never experienced it. So it's just one of those things where I can understand why the worth isn't there. Because I can't say, yeah, I had a lot of worth, but I did have a bunch of women that loved me, that really loved me unconditionally. And being the firstborn, I just had this tag on my head that was like, if I don't do it, if I don't do something different, how is the rest of them going to do something different? I just had to be the example. But the only way that I knew that I could be the example was by doing the opposite of what people in my neighborhood did. By just doing the opposite. Now, I don't know if that's a good strategy. I can't say it's the best strategy, you know. It's just a strategy. It's the strategy that I utilized. And it was amazing. When I say amazing, it was amazing. Loved everything about it. Because I grew up in a way where I was loved, absolutely loved. So I agree with this last point right here wholeheartedly, that our self-worth just isn't there. It just isn't there. And I could say to you that it's probably one of the most important things that I've tried to instill in my children, for them to feel like they have some worth. So, man, that's a lot. That's a lot, and that's heavy. You know, it's so heavy. It's hard for me to even look at you, right? But that's heavy. That's heavy. Because how do you get off the endangered list if you don't feel any self-worth? How do you get off the endangered list if you don't feel any self-worth? And if you don't feel any self-worth, how do you build community immunity? So, and then you can move away from some of this violence, where you end up having collective worth, like community worth. How do you move from self-worth to community worth? It's an interesting thing to deal with. It's an interesting problem to solve. Such a beautiful thing. Wow. So on that note, I'm going to say, that's another one of those things where it's just hashtag, no hashtag, because these are things that people talk about but don't do nothing about. You know, it's kind of like, I'm. You want to be optimistic about things, but how do you be optimistic about things when even when the law changes, the actions don't change? You know, we have a history in the United States of America where we will go and we will change the law. We will put things in place, and then we will do something to repeal those changes so black folks don't have access to it, right? You take something real simple. How do you have a bunch of people commit treason against the United States of America, and what you do is you give them all their land back that you took away from them? The same land, the 40 acres and a mule that you promised black folks when you said, help us rebuild this nation. When you say, hey, you know what, help us win this war. That same thing you made sure you took back. So it's like one of those things where you could put the law in place, right? But if there's no action against that law, what do you do? What do you do at that point? I don't know. But I can tell you this much. I'm not going to be endangered forever. I'm not going to be endangered forever. And the thing is that having a pandemic right now is one of the best levelers that could have ever happened. It is one of the best levelers that could have ever happened. It's interesting. But that's a talk for another time. Anyway, here's the deal. My name is Devon Morris. I'm going to end it at this particular point because we've been talking for a while, and man, it's been a good conversation. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with you, in the near future. So tune in next week. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube. Follow us on one of the podcast platforms. And then we can keep this conversation going. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Just make sure you take care of yourself. Over and out. See you next time.